Alrighty, so now we're going to look at K and then L. So others, meanwhile, see looting as a form of empowerment, a way to reclaim dignity after decades of abuse at the hands of police and other authorities. When you have the ability to gain more of that power back, people take the opportunity to do so. Rashawn Ray, a sociologist at the University of Maryland, told me. So some new words that name fundamental and powerful concepts being used to make sense of looting, why people loot, and who loots, includes empowerment, reclaiming something, dignity, abuse, authorities, police, and really, I think we've already highlighted police, but definitely these words, empowerment, reclaim dignity, are new concepts being used to make sense of looting. When you have the ability to gain some of the power back, people take the opportunity to do so. And again, this is another sociologist giving a perspective. So again, I want you to think about how could you use information in here to present an argument with at least one premise in support of the conclusion that we argued for here. So here the conclusion would be, it may be morally permissible to loot, okay? What premise can you form out of the paragraph K in support of that conclusion? Again, you have to use intellectual empathy, especially if you're vehemently opposed to looting for any reason, any kind of violence, any of that. You have to practice intellectual empathy even more because you're trying to construct in a valid, charitable way a viewpoint that you disagree with. So that's an important skill. So that's what I'm probably going to have you do in the Blackboard Created Review, is argue for the conclusion. It might be morally permissible to loot. And then what reason can you give based just solely on this paragraph here? If you can come up with two reasons, they might be independent reasons that you pull out of here, like use an idea in here or a phrase in here or a sentence, and then maybe add one of your own that you come up with in virtue of using in virtue of using this to formulate premise one. You might come up with some additional support that relates to premise one, or maybe you can pull out two. Maybe you can use ideas in here to formulate two statements in support of the conclusion. That's fine. But yeah, come up with an argument for looting being morally permissible at least sometimes. And notice that each of these arguments would have a slightly different focus in how they're arguing for the conclusion, but they're basically, in terms of what I'm trying to get you to do, we're arguing for the same conclusion, but from different angles. This should be its own argument, and this will be its own argument. In cases where peaceful protests haven't created change, protesters might feel that looting and vandalism are the only way to make their voices heard. In Baltimore, they've been saying for generations how the Baltimore Police Department was, but nobody listened. Lorenzo Boyd, the director of the Center for Advanced Policing at the University of New Haven, told me. And then Freddie Gray got killed. Nobody listened. Then they started protesting. Nobody listened. But as soon as CVS burned down in Baltimore, wow, the whole world watched. So it's really interesting to think about what's going on in this paragraph, where they're saying, look, we've tried the peaceful protests, but they haven't done what? They haven't created change. So that's an important concept that's being used. So the concept of creating change through peaceful protests, so that's another concept. The idea here is that those aren't working. Those don't create change. And so it's almost like they're saying we had to go to our last resort because nobody was listening. We had to go in the direction of looting. So maybe there's another argument that can be constructed here, okay? So the conclusion, again, some people might say, look, when something bad is happening and you've tried to get change to happen, sometimes you have to resort to violent means or vandalism or looting to be heard because that gets people's attention. So doesn't that sound like support for the conclusion that not only might it be morally permissible to loot, but maybe you're morally obligated to loot sometimes. Like if nothing else is getting the job done, you tried your peaceful protest, you tried petitioning, you've tried different things, but it hasn't worked, and the bad things are still going on, then maybe you're actually not only is it morally permissible to loot, but maybe you're morally obligated. Like, because maybe something is happening so bad that the only way to stop that bad is to do what might be considered another bad to get the other bad to stop, and then you'll stop doing your bad once the other person stops doing their bad. I know that sounds like a strange argument, but, it's one that people could possibly make, and it definitely seems to be in the mind of some looters and protesters even. So again, I want you to come up with a reason here for the conclusion, and the conclusion is we are morally, the conclusion again is it is morally permissible. It might be morally permissible to loot, or it is morally permissible to loot sometimes, or it is sometimes morally permissible to loot. So state that as a conclusion, and again, you're using this format, and then pull a premise out of here. So pull at least one premise. This argument can have just one premise, but what in this argument can be used as a new idea that supports this conclusion? In other words, what might some people know as a premise as from here, or an idea, what idea could be used to formulate a statement in support of the conclusion that it is sometimes morally permissible to loot? Okay, that's all for this video.